Gaslighting is a particularly insidious form of emotional abuse, wherein the abuser is trying to gain psychological control by manipulating their target in order to gain control over them. And so it's done by trying to make you doubt your own perceptions, your own senses. So that might take the form of suggesting that somebody is crazy or that they haven't seen or experienced what they remember, flatly denying the obvious. It is its own form of abuse, but it very commonly will accompany forms of abuse such as sexual abuse, human trafficking, physical abuse as a way to maintain control over the victim and as a way of escaping consequences.
The Ms. Texas Show is a voice of hope for victims, survivors, advocates, and community leaders against gender-based violence to share their stories and resources. We began showcasing life in Texas. Today we are impacting lives not only in Texas, but also around the world. Under our segment Military Time, we run this segment in partnership with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. We invite military and veterans who have overcome traumatic events to share their experiences during and after their military service. Under our beauty segment, we invite fellow pageant winners and contestants, artists, musicians, actors, models, and dancers, and last but not least, our survivor leaders from family violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault, stalking, and other traumatic events who are ambassadors for these causes to share their lives and the impact they have made. To become a guest on our show, email us at MsUSATexas@gmail.com. If you would like to support victims and survivors of gender-based violence, make a tax-deductible donation to Hope Pyx Global at www.hopyxglobal.org.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the MsTexasShow, and I am your host, Eileen Dawn. As always, we are excited to share the expertise from our survivors advocates on the different matters regarding gender-based violence. And today we have a special guest, Dr. Deborah Vinall. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Eileen. It's great to be on your show.
Thank you. So, Dr. Vinall, I know that you wrote a book called Gaslighting and a guide to help with emotional healing as well as relationship. And I was wondering, if you can start with telling our audience about yourself, what it is that you do, and what brought you to this line of work. That would be great.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Well, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and a doctor of psychology. I specialize in working with trauma, specifically sexual-based trauma, and as well as other forms of trauma as well. I have a private practice in Southern California. I've worked extensively with survivors of human trafficking, rape, assault, child abuse, as well as survivors of mass shootings. I am originally from Canada, and I make my home in Southern California, and I'm a mom of one teenager.
Wow. Well, welcome to the United States. I'm sure you're established over there, but I'm sure that's a huge climate change for you. What part of Canada are you from originally?
I am from British Columbia.
Oh, okay. I love it. I love British Columbia. I've only been to Vancouver, but I always loved it.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
It is. It is. Well, it's not bad that you traded for Southern California because that's beautiful. I mean, I wouldn't trade anywhere else. If I have an opportunity, I would move there without a blink.
Oh yeah, well, it has its own beauty here as well, and it's nice and warm, which is a switch.
Totally, totally. Well, thank you so much for the work that you do, to help with people who have been through, like you say, the sexual trauma, including human trafficking, rape, and sexual assault, and mass shooting, etc. That takes someone with passion. I was wondering, like, is there some thing that made you want to do this line of work? What it is that make you decide to work in this field?
Hmm. Yeah, I always wanted to work um, with young women who were struggling who from difficult things. And when I was in my early 20s, I was volunteering with young people, and I found that some of the things people were dealing with was just beyond what I knew how to help with. And so that had me start going back to school to study psychology and crisis counseling and whatnot. And I thought, well, this could really be helpful. And so I went back and got multiple degrees in those related fields. And I guess that probably stems, I'm sure, then stems from my own childhood and adolescence, which had its own share of traumas as well, and wanting to provide for other young women the kind of support that perhaps I needed, um, to let others know that no matter what happens, you're so valuable and you're so much more than what you've gone through. And that, I think, is what really drives me, and also what is behind, in some ways, the books that I've written, the Trauma Recovery Workbook for Teens and the Gaslighting Guide to Recovery from Emotional Abuse.
Well, thank you for your compassion. I think, in our line of work, it really takes that compassion for you to do that, because I know the work is not easy. You're dealing with these trauma, and as you, as a psychologist, very well know that people working in this field, like when we say therapist needs therapist, that literally you go through these traumas sometimes as the secondary trauma as well. So I really commend you for your passion to do the work that is so important. Now, as an expert, you talked about, the trauma recovery for teens, and I would love to learn more about that book as well as gaslighting. So, can you tell our audience, because for our audience, I would say like are comprised of different people that can be who are entry level, who does not know anything at all, can be people who are survivors, it can be social workers like yourself, as well as law enforcement. So they might already know. But for those who doesn't already know, what is gaslighting? And if you can give examples and describe to them for them to be able to relate, that would be very helpful.
Sure. Well, gaslighting is a particularly insidious form of emotional abuse, wherein the abuser is trying to gain psychological control by manipulating their target in order to gain control over them. And so it's done by trying to make you doubt your own perceptions, your own senses. And it's a slow drip, drip, drip process of eroding and chipping away at your self confidence. It's not just a one time statement of contradicting somebody, as sometimes people are using now in the common vernacular, but it's really an insidious process of trying to undermine your confidence. So that might take the form of suggesting that somebody is crazy, or that they haven't seen or experienced what they remember, flatly denying the obvious. Um, and it's also accompanied by a lot of different patterns, such as belittling and criticizing, and verbal attacks, and other verbal abuses. It is its own form of abuse, but it very commonly will accompany forms of abuse such as sexual abuse, human trafficking, physical abuse, as a way to maintain control over the victim and as a way of escaping consequences. Because if you are able to get your target to believe that it's their fault, or that maybe it's not as bad as it feels, they're less likely to break away from you, and they're less likely to report what's going on.
I think this is very important that you connected this with, sexual assault, human trafficking, because as you mentioned, it doesn't just happen alone. Many of the survivors that we work with, they deal with polyvictimization. So they might start with reporting what they know, that I am a victim of domestic violence, for instance. Then as we assist them with them further, we found out, oh, okay, so the perpetrator also tried to traffic them for profit. So that's sex trafficking. And then we found out that the perpetrators actually, raped them uh, with coercion and threats and everything. So this is like very helpful for you to educate our audience about the control. And you mentioned about the control side, and we understand that there are different forms of control and the power and control wheel. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that as well?
Yeah, speaking specifically about sex trafficking, people like to use images of people being tied up and focus on this idea of physical constraints, but really psychological constraints are more common because they're more powerful. If you can get a person to believe, you wanted it, this was your idea, you really wanted me to either rape you, or you're the one who wanted to be walking the streets, you're a slut, these kinds of words, and erode that inner truth that a person has about really being, I know people don't always love the word victim, but in that moment being the target of that person's control, then you don't need to lock the door. Because when you believe that you're not worth more, and you believe that maybe this is all I wanted, and all I really, there's no other future for me, this is who I am, this is what I want, then they're not going to leave. And if you tell them over and over, nobody else would love you, nobody else would care for you the way I do, even while hitting that person and trafficking them and doing these horrible things to them, then eventually you believe that as well. So there's, again, that separation between what you know to be true, what all of your instincts and all of your senses are telling you, and what this other person is telling you and becomes to feel true to you.
Yeah, you talked about the control, and going back to what you said from the beginning, that being called crazy, only because they want to deny what they have done that is wrong, and belittle them and call them, you're not loved, no one loves you, and you're stupid, or those hurtful words, and that really makes a huge impact for like the survivors, I refer them to as. But I just wanted to share with you, I have been through that myself. So I've kind of walked the walk with them from the dark side now to the bright side. But I've been through that with the help of a therapist like yourself, with the help of someone compassionate like yourself. But I must confess that at the time, I really believed what they said. They said, you are, in my case, my perpetrator called you a loser. And if you are repeatedly being told that sentence for multiple times, and the reality and the words become kind of blended together, and it gets blurry, and I'm beginning to think, and you know how I now believe like life is a prophecy that I fulfill by myself, but I literally kind of walk into like becoming a loser because if you tell me I'm a loser, so I'm doing things that as a loser that will do. So what would you tell someone who's in that situation to be able to identify that, to be able to differentiate that, to get out of the situation?
There's a lot there. That's a big question. Um, a couple things I want to jump back, and then I'll come back to this part. You mentioned the polyvictimization and how this starts to change your mindset when you hear it over and over again. And I also wanted to link, very often these things can happen to us in our adolescence or early adulthood. And I don't know if this is your experience or not, but for many people, it also pulls on a history that started earlier in childhood, with a different form, perhaps, of gaslighting, of emotional abuse, of criticism and put downs. And so if you already have a low self-esteem because maybe parents have been doing something like this, you've been in a way groomed for this to happen. When somebody like that enters your life, you're already looking for somebody who maybe can seem like a rescuer, and that might present themselves as that. But when they start telling you you're a loser or you're a slut or whatever, and you've heard these kinds or similar words before, there's a place that's been created inside you to receive it. And so it becomes so difficult to ignore that or to say, no, that's wrong, because it doesn't contradict your internalized beliefs that are already there. And that's the real struggle. When it's easy to compare what somebody's saying to our perceptions, it becomes it's a lot easier to break free from it. So what to do when this is going on? One thing that I encourage people to do is to keep a journal or notes. Now, if there's a possible safe way to do that with privacy, in order to keep an objective record of what's going on. So a gaslighter, a controller like that, is going to be doing this in multiple different ways. And so, for example, you might get into a fight with this person and say, you did this, you did that, and they're like, no, I never did that, and they just flatly deny it over and over. You're crazy, and you're thinking, I remember this, but maybe I am crazy. Am I hallucinating? Am I making this up? So if you keep a record, you can go back and read it. If you're keeping a journal, no, I wrote this down. I know this happened. And so if you're seeing these patterns emerge with somebody, especially if you can't immediately break free from that relationship, keeping a record can help you maintain a sense of your own sanity. So, and the other thing I would say is, you really can trust your intuition. You really can trust your senses, your self-knowledge. It's very rare for somebody to be hallucinating. That's very uncommon, as much as people like to throw that around. And that's your inner wisdom, and that intuition. So trust yourself. Know that you have that source of wisdom within you.
It's very informative. Thank you so much for mentioning that. And now that you talk about it, I think the intuition part plays a big part as well. It's a lot of the time, women call it sixth sense, and we have our sixth sense, and we feel like, yeah, I felt something is wrong. I can't really tell. There's no proof, but I felt it wrong. But there is a possibility that that perpetrator, whoever, might deny the fact and really try to blame you, which goes to the gaslighting. But I also like what you mentioned about the adolescent period, when they got really like something that's embedded in them since they were very little. So that become a pattern, because I just had another interview just now, and I'm like, children don't really know what is right or wrong, and they're told by that supposedly role model by their parents. And if they're during that development period for their brain, their parents told them that you're stupid, they will think that they're stupid because that's all they know, all they're exposed. And that directs me to the next question, ACEs. And I would love you to help our audience explore more about the relationship, about the possibilities of the childhood gaslighting, ACEs, and what impact could possibly cause to their adulthood.
Yeah, you're asking about ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale. Yeah, that's some amazing research that went over decades and hundreds of thousands of people by the Kaiser Foundation, where they correlated. They looked at all of the different 10 major categories of adverse childhood experiences, ranging from having an incarcerated parent to child abuse to substance abuse in the home, sexual abuse, parental divorce, all these different adverse childhood experiences. And then the higher your number, so it's simply counting them up, the number of these you experience, the greater your likelihood of having a whole host of negative health outcomes later in life. Be it, and some of them seem disconnected and some might feel more directly connected, but whether that's cancer or heart disease or diabetes, all kinds of health conditions, you're much more likely to experience if you've had a difficult childhood. So really powerful research there. It really shows, and what's really key here is what shows is that trauma is stored in the body. This is something we know to be true. The body is such an important resource. We have to listen to it. We store the trauma in the body. And so I'm jumping together, putting a few things together here, but you're talking about intuition. And I thought, I wonder if our listeners know, how do you find your intuition if you've felt separated from it through gaslighting or other experiences over time? And I would direct you back to the body. Listen to your body. Notice what's tensing up, what feels tight, what hurts, and just spend some time paying attention to that. That will help you tap into your intuition, because we hold so much wisdom in our felt sense in our body. We call that interoception. Because we hold it in our body, when we ignore it and we don't have positive outlets for all the pain that we store inside, it can develop into disease. And that's what the Kaiser Foundation found with the ACEs study.
Yes, that's true. I know that myself, I can relate to it when my stomach hurts. That's usually like when I'm stressed out and all the chemicals and acid that's causing the stomach to hurt and everything. So for someone who, I always say like let's use domestic violence for instance, and I know like sex trafficking, sexual assault, there can be like physical injury as well. But for instance, domestic violence, there definitely is physical injury. But I say that physical injury can be healed, the scars can go away, the wounds can go away, but emotional ones can, in my opinion, never go away. There are days that you feel good. There are days you're just not gonna feel good, and you just have to cope with it. So, what are your advices? In your book, and congratulations, by the way. I heard that you are the finalist. Then still waiting on the final words for the winners categories and etc. But your book talks about emotional healings and the steps and the guide. What are your advices for someone who has been through that, and what should they do?
Yeah, no, it's so true. The wounds that are inflicted psychologically, emotionally, go so much deeper and last so much longer. And yet we often as a society don't take it seriously. We intervene, we send in social workers when there's sexual or physical abuse that's known, but emotional abuse, we're like, well, that's just parenting. And it really, really can set you up for a lifetime of pain and self-consciousness and relationship issues. So it's important for us to take it seriously, not only societally, but also intrapersonally, looking into ourselves, paying attention to where the hurt is, and not having the concept that I just need to be tough. Strength is not ignoring our pain, but having the strength to be able to face what we've gone through, what we feel, even the strength to let ourselves cry. That actually takes great strength, to know that you can hurt and break and still go on. So, what I would say, emotional healing comes from, first of all, being honest with yourself, taking account of what you've gone through, of where it hurts, and allowing yourself to grieve for what it has cost you and what you've lost. It involves learning to love yourself, and this can be so hard if you haven't felt loved by others, because what does that even feel like? What does that look like? We internalize the negative. Our negative self-talk is the internalization of the negative voices that we've heard throughout our lives. So even learning how to speak with kindness and compassion to ourselves can be very challenging without a good model. But that's the work, that's the challenge, noticing the way that we speak to ourselves. Is it, oh, you're so stupid. Oh, I'm so stupid. Yeah, I messed up again. You always screw up. Is it that kind of voice? Or is it something like, oh, okay, well, that's okay. Try again. I've got this. I can handle this. That encouraging, compassionate voice goes a long way. So noticing that self-talk, learning to shift it. Also trying to reach out and build healthy relationships with other people, perhaps. And I'm not even talking at this point about romantic relationships, and maybe that comes at some point, but healthy friendships or mentors, if possible, maybe allowing yourself to trust a therapist, a counselor who can help you really work through the painful things that have caused this kind of pain. And take time with it. Don't expect it to happen all at once. It's okay if it takes time. It's like learning to swim. First, you just learn to float before you learn to dive into the deep water, right? And just, again, being compassionate with yourself as you go through a process of healing.
So well said. I come from a culture that I remember I had an argument, or should I say disagreement with my therapist. I'm like, no, 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 I'm not gonna love myself because loving myself in my culture means selfish. It took me a whole lot of time to learn to love myself. And today I gave back by giving talks, and I wrote a book as well to share not in depth about this specific topic, but about human trafficking, sexual assault, domestic violence, my journey step by step, how I recovered. But I feel like it's a journey that I used different tools and including like which you said the self-talk. And I'm curious about what your opinion is about the self-affirmation, because I remember when I was going through this journey, I was like looking desperately for any advice, any therapy, any methods, books, talks, everything. And there are so many different ways. One of them is the self affirmation. And I wonder what your opinion is that if you think that's useful, and if so, how can the people who are going through that can apply with their current situation.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm happy to talk about some of the different trauma therapies that I believe are the most effective based on research. But um, to that point, yeah, I think self talk is part of it. And I don't mean to suggest that it's all of it. I definitely relate to what you're saying about this sense that to to love yourself is selfishness. I definitely grew up with that same mentality as well. Um, and and but it's interesting because the more that I've been able to learn to embrace myself, even though I always thought I was a very loving person, I feel like there's just a greater expansiveness to that, to acceptance and compassion for all of humanity. And so it's amazing how that works, and that it's actually not selfish. It creates less of that and more love for others, because if I think I'm this loathsome person who's done all these horrible things and I can still love myself, why can't I love everybody else? Why can't I understand that they have a story too? And they have a reason for maybe being that disagreeable of a person or whatever. So it really expands out from self to everyone. As to what is the place for self affirmation, how does that work? The more that our brain is full of neurons, right? And the more that we travel down a certain neural pathway, the more we reinforce it. And so when we're constantly hearing and repeating to ourselves, to use your example from earlier, you're such a loser, you're such a loser, then that neural pathway is deeply entrenched. So the more we travel it, the more we stay there. But if we start to dig a new neural pathway, start to forge that, then it can start to compete with the other one. So if the more times we're repeating something like, you know, um, what would be a replacement for you're such a loser? Like you're you're only human, maybe, or even you're a good person. You're doing your best. Whatever those replacement words of kindness to yourself are, the more you travel them, the more you come closer to believing them, even if at first they don't come to mind automatically or they don't feel as strong. They will grow over time. As to how to get there when it feels like such a leap, when you're just firmly entrenched in the self hatred, one thing that some research has found very powerful for trauma, and that I kind of stumbled upon by accident myself before I read the research, was I have found yoga to be very healing. And there's a whole modality of trauma sensitive yoga that I've become trained in through the Trauma Institute by Bessel van der Kolk in Boston. He's the author of The Body Keeps a Score. A lot of people are familiar with that book. Um, but what I learned through just a gentle practice of yoga is I learned to listen to my body. Again, going back to the body as a source of wisdom, I learned to stop comparing myself to all the other yogis on their mats and just focus on mine, but to listen to what my body wants. Like, what is too much stretch? What is just the right amount? What feels restorative and what feels good? And that it was okay to take this 1 hour a week to just do something for my body that felt good, that felt restorative, that felt like self care. And so sometimes when the words and the beliefs can't come first, again, starting with the body can be an avenue into finding self care, which builds to self compassion and maybe even one day to self love.
That's amazing. To be honest, I mean, I love yoga, first of all, and I've never heard about this yoga that, is specifically designed to treat trauma. And I'm sure a lot of our audience will be thinking like me, why didn't I find out about that earlier? So unfortunately, I'm not there, but if I'm in the area, I would love to seek for you. But for the audience who are in your area, how can they find you in order, to get this yoga therapy?
To get in touch with me, if you're in California, you can go to, I have two websites. One is my therapy website is tamarcounselingservices.com, tamarcounseling.com. So that's TAMAR counseling.com. And my other website, it focuses more on my writing, and that's drdeborahvinall.com. But
That's
there's
amazing.
on both.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like, time flies when we're talking about so much. I'm just like intrigued by all the topics we're talking about because for me, it's like a lifetime recovery journey. And even though I have been on the other side, I want to help, find out more, learn more how I can help myself to get to an even better, brighter place. But on the other hand, how I can assist, through my lived experience to help other people. So learning from you who has been through this training, that's really helpful. And earlier on you talked about some of the proven methods of trauma recovery. You have mentioned EMDR. What are some of the methods that you think will be helpful for these kind of trauma, and what are the practices that you do?
Sure. Yeah, trauma sensitive yoga is one modality. EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, is another empirically validated trauma therapy that I am licensed in and practice. And it involves awareness of body, cognitions, our thoughts, our emotions, and images from memories and all the sensory fragments of a trauma that often come in like isolated fragments, sounds, sights, smells, etc. And we process that with either bilateral side to side eye movements or even bilateral taps or tones. And that just stimulates more of the brain to reprocess old memories that get stuck when it's traumatic and be filed away like historical memory. Because typically with trauma, it feels very present. It feels as though you're still there, even if it's been 20 some years. And so it's mimicking like the REM sleep, the rapid eye movement part of sleep, and dream sleep, where we process the stressors of the day. But when something is so overwhelming that it becomes trauma, we're not able to just use our brain's adaptive memory processing systems like REM sleep are overwhelmed. And so we kind of facilitate this process in a waking state, and it's really, really powerful. Brain spotting is another form of trauma therapy that I'm certified in practice. And it's also been really, both of these have been all three of these have been transformative in my own life and healing from my traumas as well. And so it's such an honor and gift for me to be able to share that with my patients as well and my clients. Brain spotting grew out of EMDR by the discovery that sometimes as you're doing the side-to-side visual tracking, there can be one spot in that visual field that really tunes into where a trauma is anchored neurologically. And so we help the patient to find that one spot in their visual field and hold that spot with either gazing at a point on a pointer or a spot in the room. And then we bring in the bilateral stimulation through music that's designed to fade from one ear to the other, and really soothing music, sometimes nature sounds or different kinds, that goes from one ear to the other. And so that's getting your left brain and your right brain all working together at the same time, while the visual point is helping to bring up the traumatic memory and incorporating awareness of the body and kind of a mindful, just noticing with self-compassion of these memories until they reprocess and the emotional intensity goes down, it abates. So really powerful stuff. Again, a good therapist is never going to just drop you into doing this act of reprocessing. So if you're afraid, like, oh my gosh, I can't even think about that thing that happened, I put all of my energy in trying to push it away, which is a lot like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. It's very hard, it takes a lot of energy. A good therapist is going to start by helping you just to feel safe in your body, in the room, develop coping skills, and when you're ready, then move into the processing. So I don't want anybody to be afraid to approach a therapist who might be able to offer these kinds of treatments, because they can really be transformative.
That's so helpful, Dr. Vinall. I think, this session has been so informative for a lot of our audience themselves, I must say, because I mentioned earlier, even if you who are listening are not survivor, unfortunately, that some are, but you can go through the secondary trauma as well. So what you're talking about really helped them a lot, whether they can apply to their everyday life themselves, that in the unfortunate event they have been through that, and or through the secondary trauma through their work, or really to have a better understanding of assisting the survivors that comes to their case workload and everything. I really appreciate your expertise and your passion in this work. Before we let you go, is there any call to action takeaway you would like to leave within our audience?
I would just like to encourage everybody, whether it's a social worker or law enforcement officer or a survivor themselves hearing this, to accept that you're worthy, that you are lovable, that you're loved, that you have a purpose and a place here, and that you belong. Just sit with that truth. Really let it sink inside. Um, it's just so important for everybody to know that. And, to reach out to somebody with compassion, as well as reaching inward with that same compassion.
So well said, so well said. And like I said, I cannot say enough thank you for your compassion, because obviously you wouldn't be here doing the work that you're doing because of your passion and the compassion that you're offering to our survivors and many people who are going through the trauma. So I commend you for your work and thank you for the great work that you do. And for everyone who is listening, you're watching the MsTexasShow, and today we're talking about gaslighting and trauma recovery and the different methods of therapy with our special guest, Dr. Deborah Vinall. And thank you again, Dr. Vinall, for your expertise and your time.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure to speak with you today.